Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 1960 game between Bobby Caro-Crusher Fischer versus Max, former world champion. Without further ado, Bobby opens with e4, best by test, c6, the Caro-Kann defense, d4, Bobby now with 2 pawns in the center, and d5 from Max, hitting the pawn. We get takes, and c4 from Bobby, hitting the pawn in the center, and we get Max developing with knight to f6, knight c3 from Bobby, and we get knight c6 and a knight to f3. So as they say, knights before bishops, and that's exactly what we get on the board. Then we get bishop to g4, pinning the knight to the queen. We get takes, and queen to b3, hitting the pawn, basically inviting black to mess up his pawn structure on the side. So we get takes from Bobby, so pawn structure messed up a little bit, and e6 from Max, making space for the bishop to develop and then to castle to the king side ultimately. Bobby snaps off the pawn, and this was a very important move, as you'll see later on, ladies and gentlemen. But first, Max takes the pawn on d4. Bobby pushes the bishop to b5 with check, and Max captures the bishop with his knight. We get Bobby first inserting a check with his queen in order to win back the piece. We get king to e7, so here Bobby got what he wanted, and then he also recaptures the knight. So the material is equal as well as dead center according to the bar. We get Max then taking knight on c3, Bobby recapturing, and so you know the pawn structure isn't the greatest to say the least, because Max has only got 2 pawn islands and Bobby's got 4, so I mean those are clearly weaknesses. Anyway, we get queen to d7, proposing a queen trade. Bobby accepts, but only if he can trade on his own terms, which is him improving his rook. We get Max then doubling up on the d file, threatening mate on d1. Bobby then covers the d1 square by developing the bishop to e3. We get queen takes queen, and then rook takes queen, and then Max makes the first blunder of the game, ladies and gentlemen. The idea here was basically to defend the pawn, which was under attack, and then we get king to e2, f6, and rook to d1, proposing a rook trade. We get takes, and king to d7. Now we get a rook to b8, which pins the bishop to the rook, and we get king to c6. I'm not too sure what this move does. Let me know in the comments below. Anyway, we get bishop takes pawn on a7 and g5. So this move is, in my mind, predominantly to make space for the bishop to move, and then one can trade off the rooks. And we get a4 from Bobby. The idea here is quite smart. As we can see, the king is cut off from the a file, making the pawn so much more dangerous. We get bishop to g7, rook b6 check, king d5, and then Bobby hitting the bishop with a rook to b7. We get bishop back to f8, and then Bobby just pins it against the rook once more. Bishop to g7, and Bobby delivers another check. King to c6, and then a rook b6 check, king to d5, and a5 from Bobby, continuing to push the very dangerous a pawn. We get f5 from Max, bishop b8 from Bobby, and we get a rook to c8, ladies and gentlemen. We get a6, sacrificing the c pawn here. We get a rook takes the pawn on c3, and we get the blunder from Bobby with a rook to b5 check. Here the engine wanted a rook to d6 check instead. Anyway, Max blunders back with king to c4, hitting the rook. And we get a rook to b7 out of the king's way, and bishop to d4, and a very important diagonal for the bishop, covering the promotion square for the pawn. Bobby delivers another check with a rook to c7, which is a incredible move actually, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can also see why, but here it comes if you don't see it. King to d3, Bobby exchanges rook, and this is a very crucial moment. If black takes with a bishop, then the pawn promotes, for instance, takes, and then the pawn just promotes. So in the game we got king takes, and do you see the crushing move which wins the game on the spot? Yes, Bobby finds it. Bishop to e5, pinning the bishop to the king, and remember the job of the bishop was to cover the a7 square. Bobby has taken this away, and Max resigned in this position, ladies and gentlemen. For those who are interested in the game, it could have continued as follows. Now takes, and Bobby making a queen, and then just collecting, and yeah, pretty sad stuff. The bishop quite sad. And then I'm going to stop here, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for watching, and I appreciate all those subs. See you in the next one.